So if you could make an anime or manga about anything, what would it be about? Let me know in the comments section below, because today I've got 10 ideas for 10 original anime series that I think will be amazing if somebody had made these. And by the way, none of these are going to be like, oh, I wish the Akira manga had a faithful anime series that was faithful to the manga, because I think not only people who read the Akira manga, but people who've read any manga and also see the anime probably feels like the anime is just this imperfect adaptation, which really sucks because that's the world we live in. And I primarily like to watch anime because we get the music with it, you get the animation, you get the color. It's like the total package, or would be if they did the story properly. I think that's why a lot of people love anime originals too. But the list that I have here is in no particular order, and also I don't care where in the world this comes from, because some of these are probably impractical to expect it to come out of Japan. So I don't really care, as long as it's got good animation, it's got a nice art style to it, and also tells the story well, then I'll watch it no matter where it comes from. So the first one that I'm looking for is a realistic war anime, and this is something I think a lot of people have been looking for. So the type of war anime that I'm looking for is going to be set in a parallel universe, or an alternate reality, that is comparable to our own reality in terms of technology, but at the same time, the countries are different, and the history really doesn't match up at all. And what I want to see out of this is I want to see strategy and combat. I want to see people fight against each other with planes, with guns, with swords, with anything really, as long as that's realistic. And I want to see the strategy there, because every war is not going to be like our objective is to go out there and kill everything that moves, because sometimes you have a particular objective and that's going to require a different strategy. And I don't really have any idea of what I want the story to be about, like what I want the war to be about. I just want something that's more realistic, that's not set in World War II, that's very pro-Japan mentality. I don't want it to be with mechs or magic, and I don't want it to be, I say the drama like Grave of the Fireflies, but I don't even consider that to be a war anime, so I'm just going to discount that. A good example is Genro the Wolf Brigade. It's not really about strategy, but it does tell a good dramatic story about characters who are in a very realistic war environment, and that also counts as well. It doesn't just have to be about the strategy, as long as it tells a good story in a realistic war environment, because I feel like that's something that anime is seriously, seriously lacking. So the second type of anime I would love to see is a long-running medieval war anime, and it's got a great morality with multiple kingdoms, and they're at war with each other. And I know this may sound familiar, like Game of Thrones. That's because I love Game of Thrones, and I probably have some inspiration from that, but I also have a very big soft spot for anything that is like medieval period, or especially medieval fantasy. I feel like those two genres work very well together. And with this, I do love Game of Thrones, and with these episodes, I always feel like anything can happen, and because of that, and because each character is like the hero of their own story, it really makes me just fall in love with it, even on the newest seasons. And I will admit they're not as good as the other seasons, but I still am invested in the characters, and I know that anything can happen, so I'm always on the edge of my seat, and halfway through the episode, I'm like, no, there's only 30 minutes left until I have to wait another week, or maybe I'll have to wait another year if it's the season finale, because they love to give you those cliffhangers on the season finales there. But with this anime, I don't want there to be one central throne or one central kingdom that everything falls under its jurisdiction. Maybe it will get like that at one point or another, and maybe that kingdom will be broken up over time. I want this to be a long-running show where either every 50 episodes or every 100 episodes, depending on what's going on, it becomes a new arc. So the way that this whole arc system would work is that every 100 or 50 episodes, probably 50 episodes is more reasonable. So I guess if you want to jump in and it's on episode like 349, and you could just wait until next week and start at episode 350. And the reason for that being is that every arc is going to be a new major event. Maybe on episode 300 to 350, one kingdom is going to fight another kingdom, and either they're going to lose or they're going to win. Either way, a lot of prevalent characters are going to die in that war, meaning you've got to displace those characters that died with new characters. So starting at episode 350, if you're coming in there, they're going to spend some time and introduce those new characters within that season and show you some of the old characters as well. And you may wonder, how is that going to work? Because you're going to be confused as to what's happening. And I don't think you will, because if you think about any really good story, they're going to say things that basically involve the history of the world, even if the history itself does not take place within the story that you're watching. They're just telling you about it. So that will be the same thing that happens here. The main difference is that if you want to know bad enough, you could just go back and watch it and see it for yourself. Whereas other anime, you have to read about it online, or you have to read the author's notes, or some sort of a lore book or something like that, you know. But with this, you could actually have all these kingdoms that are fighting against each other and characters dying off. And if you start at episode 450, then maybe somebody that started episode 250 or episode 1, they're not going to like the characters that this other person likes, because maybe it's their family that killed off all of their favorite characters. And I think that would be something that would be really cool for an anime series. And the kingdoms would be totally different from each other. Like Kingdom A would be just your traditional like medieval kingdom, and it's got like trebuchets and catapults and people riding on horses with swords and spears and everything, and bows and arrows, and your traditional castles. Kingdom B will be nomadic. Kingdom C would be these people who are basically mages. They study magic. They're very spiritual people. And maybe Kingdom C, I always like this when shows do this, when they go back and they start talking about the ancient history. And maybe Kingdom C could be something like they dug into the ground and found some sort of ancient artifact that uncovered some form of magic that nobody knows about. And, you know, I think it'd be really awesome to have all of these different kingdoms. And there's not going to be one central kingdom that everybody's fighting for. But at some time, it could become that way. Like, maybe it starts off episode 1, there's 10 different kingdoms, but maybe by episode 200, there could be 15 kingdoms, because there was a feud within one of the kingdoms, and some of them split up and formed their own things. And maybe by episode 400, there's like 7 kingdoms, and at some point or another, it could be down to like 3 major kingdoms that are at war with each other, and then those kingdoms could get split up again. You know, it could literally just go on forever, and there's always going to be new characters introduced. It could go on forever, because every 50 episodes, you could come in fresh and learn about it that way. And maybe there could be some sort of beginner's thing, like, oh, what can we learn about this kingdom, just to have some sort of, just to keep out all of the unnecessary, redundant exposition, which I imagine you would have, because every 50 episodes, somebody has to learn about like 15 different kingdoms or whatever. That's probably the only problem right there. But as far as being lost in terms of like what happened in the past, I think it would be very easy, because then they could just go back and watch it all. I think that would be really awesome. That's probably the one that I'm looking forward to, that I would love to see the most out of this list right there. Moving on to number 3, we have professional wrestling. And I know we've already got shows like Ultimate Muscle and Tiger Mask, but that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for something, if you guys remember playing the SmackDown versus Raw games, or the SmackDown games, or the No Mercy, the wrestling games that came before the current gen of wrestling games. Because the current gen, the story modes kind of suck, because they make you feel like wrestling is actually this predetermined thing, and you're supposed to do certain things in certain matches, and it's just not a very good story mode, because they're taking you behind the scenes and training to become a wrestler and everything. I like the older wrestling game stories, where you could actually get in feuds with wrestlers and come out and fight them, and it was kind of like the character that you played as, because I always love to play as created characters in those games, as my own original characters. You always play from a character who has the perspective that wrestling is not predetermined, that wrestling is very real to them. And I want to see a story that's from that perspective, where you've got somebody in this maybe like 1990s, mid-early 2000s, WWE, WWF, and they're going through and having all these feuds with people and having these just crazy fights, and people are beating each other with chairs and stuff, and you have these awesome, like Stone Cold. There'd be like a Stone Cold character. You guys remember when he drove in with a beer truck and started spraying people? You just have over-the-top stuff like that, but it happens like every once in a while for comedic effects, but mostly it's like people are betraying each other, and there's all sorts of people have their own motives, and you can't trust anybody. I think that would be really cool for a wrestling series. It would have nothing to do with WWE, by the way. I don't want it to do anything with that, because I'm not a big fan of the story itself. I just like the idea of it and the atmosphere that you had there. I used to be into wrestling, but you know, it's been a long time ago. So I just think that that would be something that a lot of people would really enjoy right there. Number 4 is, I want something that basically takes the structure of Shonen Battle series, maybe like Yu Yu Hakusho, Saint Seiya, or Shadow Skill, or really anything like that, but I want it to be told for adults. And the thing is, shonen anime is for teenagers, and all these shonen battle series, they're technically for teenagers. You look at anybody on YouTube who's talking about this stuff, they're adults. I mean, for the most part, a lot of people out there who love the shonen anime are adults. So why don't they just make shonen anime that is for adults? A seinen with the structure of a shonen, about somebody who's just training because they want something, and they're training in all these lost arts of just these deadly attacks and whatnot, and they're fighting against villains who they can be totally one-dimensional, villainous, just flat evil characters, and that will be fun because I think everybody now and then likes to watch a show like that. But I think as adults, we're kind of just limited to the stuff that's aimed at teenagers. That's something that I've been craving for a long time, something like a shadow skill for adults, where you've got a character who he's training to become one of the world's strongest combatants, one of the strongest warriors in the world, but they're currently at the stalemate within all of these other countries, and there's actually the secret thing going on, so they're trying to wage war with each other behind the scenes there, and then the war does break out, and you start fighting against these people who are so extraordinarily strong that you can't even, I remember there was a part, I always talk about Shadow Skill just because I have very fond memories of it. That was actually the very first anime series that I ever completed, and I just remember looking back on that, how you had the character who his arteries were cut mid-battle, and he was bleeding out all over the place, and he would run around, and he had this cape of blood that was behind him because it was all spewing. Stuff like that that's actually filled with a lot of violence and blood and a lot of just anger and a lot of action in the fights. I think we need some of that, but just for adults, because a lot of people recommend me Hunter x Hunter. Oh, the stuff you're talking about sounds like Hunter x Hunter, but I think it would be just more enjoyable for me if the characters were adults. Maybe not somebody in their 30s, but maybe somebody's 22, 24, maybe even 18, 19, for example. That would be fine, because that would be a total different mentality than it is you're watching somebody that's 14 or 15 and they're the main character of this really intense fighting show. I just want something that's a seinen but structured like a shonen, and it's just for fun, not meant to be taken too seriously. It's just got a lot of intense fights there. So moving on to number 5, we have an anime that is based around MMA. And to be honest with you, I'm not a big fan of MMA. I like to see all sorts of action and violence and stuff in anime or video games, but when it comes to real people, that's really where I draw the line. I don't really like to watch that stuff because it's people just bashing each other's heads in, and there's blood, and I even see clips people breaking bones and stuff. That I don't like to see that sort of thing, especially that clip with the girl that has a cauliflower ear and she gets kicked and her ear splits in half and all the stuff shoots out. I don't like to watch that stuff, but when it's anime or video games, and that's different. So I would like to see an MMA-oriented anime, but the MMA is not a big sporting event. It's more like an underground thing where people are just betting on fighters, and there's this big betting atmosphere. And if you were to think about, if you've ever seen the anime Baki the Grappler, I want to see that, but where it's not a 14-year-old kid. I mean, I really like Baki the Grappler. I think it's awesome. You got this 14-year-old kid. Episode 1, he gets in a fight with 100 people in this park on this basketball court in the middle of his neighborhood, and he gets his ass kicked, but he takes down 50 of them. So it's somebody that's really tough fighting against these people, and I really want their strength to be a superhuman, just like that 14-year-old Baki when he fought 100 people and took out 50. Or there's another 13-year-old kid in Baki the Grappler. He takes a stack of cards and he puts his finger on it and he just pops it out. He rips the stack of cards with 2 fingers when they're all stacked on top of each other. I want superhuman feats of strength. There's also times where people fight against bears and stuff. I don't want to give too much away by the story there. But in the second half, it also becomes this MMA style thing is kind of underground. And that's what I want this to be. I want this to be about somebody preferably who's 19, 20, just somebody that's a little bit older. Basically, a lot of the anime that we have here, we have it kind of already, but it's mostly aimed towards people who are younger. I just think that they should make some of these focus on the older demographic here. But I just want somebody who's training and fighting in these cages, and they're in this sort of underground betting arena and stuff, and he's fighting against people who have all sorts of superhuman strength, people that will just to train, they go out into the whole Street Fighter thing where they're beating up a car with their bare hands and feet or something like that. I think that would just be a lot of fun, and also you get to see the whole like my favorite thing out of Hajime no Ippo, where he's like training really hard, just giving it all, and you can actually see that he improves over time. I just think that'll be a really fun show. It's kind of like a mixture between insane, unbelievable action, but at the same time a sport. It's like in that middle ground, because I'm not that big of a sports fan, but also I like to have a lot of action as well. So I think that's a middle ground right there. Number 6 is going to be an anime about politics, and I don't necessarily want this to be real politics. I know there's a lot of dirty things going on in politics, but if you were to think about a show kind of like House of Cards, but there's also a manga, if you've ever heard of it, I want you guys to look it up too. It's actually pretty interesting. It's called Sanctuary. It's about these two guys that one of them is a yakuza and another one is a politician. They are basically trying to take over Japan. One person is trying to take over Japan at street level, one person is trying to take over Japan at a political level, so that they would basically rule the country that way. I thought that was a really interesting manga, and I never really finished it though. I got about halfway through it. I wasn't a big fan of the political bit, just because I felt it was kind of boring, and this is where it's got to get interesting here. I want somebody who he's running for some sort of political office, and he gets elected because he has honest values and manages to beat out everybody else around who he believes is corrupt, but once he gets in there and is actually elected for whatever position it is, he realizes how corrupt it actually is, where people are getting killed off and stuff like that. Basically like House of Cards, but I want the main character to be a moral person who wants to do the right thing, and I want him to actually question his morality as he goes through it, because he realizes he has to do immoral things to fight back against these people who are trying to control everybody and have everybody under their power so that they can feed their own greed and just fill their own pockets, basically. So he's doing immoral things against them, but at the same time he's struggling to stay true to his real self and do good for the people, because that's why he's there. So it's this big struggle between his morals, and then you've got people who are against them, and they're just killing off people that he knows and assassinating his friends, or trying to at least, and sometimes it gets thwarted and other times it doesn't, you know. I think that would be really fun right there. Basically, like, if not Game of Thrones, wow, I keep bringing that up. Basically, if like House of Cards was an anime, but the character was actually a very moral person, because I know in House of Cards the guy's not very moral, even from the very first episode. I just want there to be that big moral debate going all the time, where it's really interesting, like, what's he going to do next? What's he going to do to fight against these people, or what are they going to do next too? So moving on to number 7, we have Westerns, and this is one of those things where if it came out, it's probably not going to come out of Japan. It's probably going to be some sort of American animation, which I'm totally fine with that, but Westerns, I love my Westerns, and this is something that's been more of an acquired taste for me. Some people grew up with it and they do love it, but for me, it's something that I started getting into a few years ago with, basically, we got John Wayne and Clint Eastwood movies. I think they're really awesome, but I just love not only their acting in the movies, but I also love the atmosphere where you have these characters, they're bounty hunters going around on the horses, and they're collecting criminals, and there's just no technology. You got to use like candles inside and everything. It's all about just people who have like really strong sense of morality, and then they're fighting against people who are criminals, who also they're most likely just poor and trying to survive, and maybe a gray morality there too. And sometimes they're going out into basically unmapped territory, because you got all of these like Native American areas out there, and they're hostile to them, but then you've got to go out there and get a bandit, and bandits set up camp, and it's got all these people, and it's like you and like one other dude, and you're just trying to fight through to save somebody, kind of like pretty much a lot of the movies. A lot of them are like that. You have bandits that are set up camp out there and unmarked territories, basically. I think that's really cool if we had an animated series like that, just because I like the style of animation. Animation really has no boundaries outside of somebody's imagination, and in some cases the budget too. So moving on to number 8, we have crime thrillers, and this is something that is desperately needed, because I feel like Monster is out there all on its lonesome as being a crime thriller, and we need more. So if you've ever seen the TV series, I think it's True Detectives, I could be wrong, I should probably look up the name, but I'm just kind of just thinking it all off the top of my head here. But True Detectives, if that's what it's called, it's got 2 police officers, and they're hunting down clues for these string of murders by these, like, satanic cult or something like that, and they do all these gruesome things with the bodies, and I want this to have a lot of horror elements, because when I was making this list, I was thinking, you know, I want good horror here. I want something that'll really make you feel fear, but having something that is primarily horror, it's probably not going to work so well in making you feel afraid because you know what you're going to expect. The great thing about this crime thriller is that you don't know what to expect. So you have these 2 detectives, and they go to these crime scenes, these grotesque crime scenes, and they're uncovering clues, and they're going through and looking up things and trying to find who is associated to what, and just looking at all these clues. And sometimes you'll see, like, people come up behind them, maybe off the corner, like you would see somebody that's, like, stalking them, but you don't know much about it. You kind of, like, spot it out the corner of your eye, and you're like, oh shit, something's about to go down here. Somebody's about to get killed. But they're going through and they're learning more about this, and as the story continues, they learn that it's actually a big secret society of maybe it's 20 people, 30 people, could be 50 people along the same lines as Johann Liebert from Monster, and they're doing these terrible things, and they're having to slowly just fight against them. And I know it sounds like the odds are against them because Johann Liebert from Monster was this terrible person who could easily take care of them both by himself, but I want this to be more about uncovering the clues and creating a big sense of mystery in order to uncover what the crime is. And I want there to be a big sense of mystery about this satanic cult that they're finding, or not really finding, but just going after the clues in order to solve the crime. And then you uncover that it's actually something big that's tied in. Maybe it could be a government thing or something. I don't know. That's probably a little bit too big for that. Maybe it's just a secret society of people that's, like, local within the city of maybe like 50, 60 people, and they all go to this one place at night and they sacrifice people or something like that. I just think that would be really a really freaky show to watch that's going to give you the feeling that you would get from horror. It's going to give you a really good sense of mystery, and also you're going to care about the characters too, because if their personalities are conflicting, which is one of the great ways that they did with the characters in True Detectives, which, is that what it's called? I should probably look that up, like I said, but just like how that show did with the characters that have truly conflicting personalities, with the conflicts and arguments that they have, you get to learn a lot about their characters there. So I think it would also give you the feeling of a really good story where it just has a lot of detail about his characters too. Number 9, I'm honestly disappointed that this is even on the list, because it's like Japan, you would assume that they would at some point or another have made a good anime that's based around samurai that's set within historical periods. I know when we talk about samurai, we get stuff like Rurouni Kenshin, good anime, even better manga. Sengoku Basara, that's more of like just an enjoyment type of thing. It's not really anything about the history. It's not even too historically accurate. It's just so loosely based on history. But I want something that maybe it's not 100% historically accurate, but it's enough to be accurate to history, but at the same time tell an interesting story as well, a very dramatic story. History is ripe with drama, and you would imagine that out of Japan, considering that in the 1960s and the 1970s, you had Akira Kurosawa that was making masterpieces of Shambara films, with samurai, these really dramatic experiences, The Hidden Fortress, Seven Samurai, Yojimbo, plenty of shows that he did that were really amazing. Then there's other movies that were like Harakiri, for example, just great movies. And when you look at samurai anime now, it's so silly, and it's not really, the history is not really important. This is their own history, and you would imagine that somebody in Japan would have made something to higher standards so that you have American people that are like, damn, why aren't there any good historical samurai anime out there? Hey, if they went ahead and made an anime adaptation of Vagabond and actually completed that, then I'd mark that off the list, because that's good enough, because that's the story of Musashi Miyamoto. But they just don't have enough really good historical accurate samurai series out there, or even if it's just a movie, I'd settle for that too. But, you know, that's just crazy that they've just been dropping the ball so consistently with that. So lastly, at number 10, I want some anime that are based on organized crime. It doesn't necessarily have to come out of Japan. If it did, then it will probably be Yakuza. If not, then it could be something like just the Mafia. And basically, you could model this around stories like Carlito's Way, The Godfather, Scarface. You could do that whole thing right there. I guess you could say Sopranos too. I've never seen Sopranos. I do want to watch it. I think I'd really enjoy that, but I just haven't had the time to sit down and really try and watch that, because I do watch a lot of anime and try and do my reviews and everything, so I'm mostly focused on watching anime. But I would love to see anime that are oriented around organized crime. It could be really anything. Maybe you're growing up in a bad neighborhood and something happens and you get sucked into the family business, or somebody takes you under their wing and you get sucked into it that way, and you have a family and you know you're doing the wrong thing, but you're trying to just be protective of your family and give them money so that your kid could grow up and just have a good future, and you're trying to not let them know anything about the life that you're really living or something like that. Or you could have somebody who is just getting out of prison and he's trying to go and live clean, but there's people who's trying to bring him back into the game. Basically, Carlito's Way. If you've never seen Carlito's Way, is a very underrated gangsta flick right there. I think a lot of people should check that out. Everybody loves Scarface. I actually like Carlito's Way more. I actually like Godfather more than Scarface too. Yeah, but everybody's seen Godfather, I think. So that's it. I just want more organized crime anime, even if it's Yakuza. I don't know why we don't have more Yakuza anime, because the Yakuza games are very popular in Japan. I think we could make an anime about that that's not just some sort of trailer or promo for a game that's coming out. I want an actual story that I can sink my teeth into with that. And I think that'd be awesome. So those are 10 ideas that I have, and I'm just going off the ideas of things that I've wanted for such a long time now. But anyways, I want to know what you guys want to see in anime, or even if it's not anime, even if it's animation from anywhere else in the world, let me know in the comments section below, and I'm interested in seeing that. So don't leave me like a whole story or anything, just give me some brief ideas there, because I'm actually really curious to see what you guys are interested in seeing. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching, everybody.